Today I've got with me PK Beville from Second Wind Dream. So welcome PK, it's so nice to have you on board and to see your face again.
Oh, thanks, Beck. You have no idea how good it feels at this early hour in the United States to see that face of yours. You are just an incredible woman. Thank you for inviting me.
It's our absolute pleasure. I don't think there's anyone else that I would rather have on board to speak about dementia, especially in the current environment. So how is everything over there?
Everything over here is still pretty awful, to be honest, with COVID-19 and the isolation that our elders are feeling over here. No visitors, they're even having to eat in their rooms, in facilities, at home. They can't go out. If they do, they're putting themselves at horrible risk here. And while the death rate is coming down, it's still horrible. We don't have a handle on it in the US, I can tell you that much. And it just seems as though, I wouldn't say it's going from bad to worse, but I would say that we're not seeing an end in sight yet.
Yeah.
So dementia is being affected horribly here. Because those living with dementia during COVID-19 are having to deal with a whole different level of isolation because they're already isolated because of the disease itself. Yeah. And then you put a mask on someone, and which we all have to wear with them. And now their information from your verbal intonation, as well as your smiles and your happy faces, is gone. So we've added a whole new level of isolation for them. So we're seeing a lot of weight loss for those living with dementia, and we're seeing increased agitation. And on the other end of the spectrum, we're seeing increased depression.
Yeah.
I'd love to give you some good news about it, but right at this point, as we sit, the news is not good.
No, it's not. And for those who don't really know what dementia is, they hear it through media, they hear it just in their community. Can you give an explanation? What is dementia?
Sure. I tell you, let me make this easy visually. So you picture an umbrella outside, and let's say that dementia is the name of the umbrella. And underneath that umbrella, let's picture it raining inside the umbrella. And inside the umbrella, every raindrop has a different name. So dementia is actually the mothership. And under that, under dementia, is Alzheimer's disease. So in other words, when you hear Alzheimer's disease, that's a part of dementia. It's the largest part of dementia. And Huntington's disease, and Lewy body, and vascular dementia, all of those, there are 40 different types of dementia. So let's take it a step further. And dementia itself is a brain disease. So when you think about the brain being diseased, think about the fact that every time you do anything, even to the point of breathing, you're using your brain. Mm-hmm. So when that becomes diseased, it's going to affect almost every part of you, from communication to understanding to movement to just about anything that you do. And to take a little bit of a deeper dive, what's actually happening is, cells all over your body are changing every little bit. They're growing and changing and melding and all of those things. And you know how with cancer, the cells become diseased. Mm-hmm. And when the cells become diseased, it causes cell death and it causes damage. Well, the same kind of thing is going on in the brain. So if you picture in your mind two cells like this, the way they stay healthy is when the cells are able to communicate with one another. So they communicate through this neurological system of synapses. So they jump They send chemicals back and forth to each other. So picture billions of these with this chemical jumping off to one another. When that chemical jumps off, it actually bathes this cell over here with nutrients. When that happens, it keeps this cell alive. So let's picture that these two cells are no longer communicating, that this cell is beginning to die and it's unable to send those impulses, those connections, those chemical responses to bathe this cell here. Well, not only is this cell going to die, but this cell's going to die. Now, what's going to happen to these chemicals that are here, that were here and unable to jump from one side to the other? Both cells are going to die, and that chemical is not going to jump to the right cells. It's going to go to the wrong thing. So that's why with people living with dementia, we get things like a misunderstanding of situations, because that chemical has jumped to the wrong thing, or an inability to recognize things. That visual input is hitting the wrong cells, so that they're coming out with a misunderstanding of the environment. Yeah. So dementia itself affects almost everything in the body as it progresses.
Yeah.
Does that help?
Absolutely. So if I was a family member concerned if my mother or my grandparents potentially had dementia, what are some of the signs that I should be noticing or should be aware of?
Well, I think communication is the key. So that I usually recommend that the family member try to understand where their loved one's coming from. For instance, if they're under a lot of stress and they're doing things that are forgetful, or they're asking for the same thing same information over and over again, I would ask them to, let me make a doctor's appointment for you and let's go see if you've got something going on. Wouldn't mention the brain unless you're comfortable saying, you know, I'm a little concerned about your confusion. Let's go to the doctor. But the first line of defense is when you start getting worried, if you can't communicate with your loved one, take them to get a full physical. Because so often we misdiagnose dementia when it's a vitamin B deficiency, and a vitamin B shot on a regular basis will help tremendously. Or it's a urinary tract infection that's gone undetected, or even an upper respiratory infection that's gone. All those things will affect the oxygen in the brain and the way the brain fires. So that would be the first thing I would do. Now, if you're not living close to your loved one and you start to sense a real decline, either over the phone or on FaceTime or Zoom, then I would contact their attending physician and tell them that you're concerned to a great level. So here's a little, I like to use this analogy because we get worried about our loved ones having dementia sometimes when it's not really the case. Yeah. So think of it this way. It's one thing to lose your keys and look for them and you've lost them, right? You can't find them. You've looked everywhere. You just can't find them. It's quite another thing to lose your keys and be looking at them and not know what they're for. Yeah. You've lost your keys in both situations, but in one situation, you know exactly what you're looking for and you can't find it. And if it's sitting in front of you, you know immediately what it's for. Yeah. In the other situation, the keys are right there and you have no idea what to do with them. Those are two completely different things, and they shed light on the visual discrimination issue and also on the inability to understand a concrete object. Yeah. So when you look at your loved one, keep in mind, first, a physical. Mm-hmm. Second, really pay attention to how they're viewing the environment and understanding what's going on in it. A lot of people get concerned because their loved one is doing a lot of word searching and they can't think of the words to come out of their mouth. And that is called expressive aphasia. And in that case, sometimes it's just a matter of a common cold going on, and other times it is a sign that we need to go ahead and do a further exam. Once that physical is done and everything comes out clean and green, then I recommend more heavily than I could possibly say that you find a geriatric specialist of some kind and have a full assessment done. Please don't let the general practitioner conduct that unless that GP has the ability to have studied a great deal about dementia.
Mm-hmm.
You wouldn't send a child to a general practitioner that deals with adults, right? Just by the same token, you wouldn't send an older adult to a general practitioner because of the same reason. They don't have the experience necessary to really treat an older adult. Us older adults have a whole different way of managing medications, of understanding what's going on around us, of dealing with other pains and issues that the normal adult does not.
Yeah. So in saying that, how is dementia diagnosed?
Well, it's interesting. Family members out there, I want you to keep this in mind. Dementia is a rule-out diagnosis. That means we conduct a bunch of tests, and until we get to autopsy, we don't really know for sure if it's dementia. Isn't that weird? It's because we can study the brain and do a lot, and look at PET scans and CT scans and MRIs, and we can see that there's cell death and we can see that there are problems, but we really can't diagnose it right away. So what we do is we rule everything else out, and we're left with the diagnosis of dementia. Now, the way that we rule things out is, remember I talked about going to the general practitioner or to the physical first? Mm-hmm. We rule that out first. And then after that, we go into a series of cognitive evaluations. We do some tests that will test how they are responding. We do some tests that will tell us how they're integrating information. We do a lot of different tests, visual, verbal, intellectual, to determine, ruling out whether or not it's delirium, which means that there's something else going on in the brain due to a physical problem, or dementia. After that, we rule out what type of dementia it is. Remember I talked about those 40 different types of dementia? Well, in order for us to really know how to treat your loved one, it's important that we deal with what type it is. For instance, if a person has Lewy body dementia, they're going to have most likely a lot of hallucinations, some auditory hearing things that aren't really there, visual hallucinations. They're going to jump to conclusions rather rapidly. It's a faster moving disease. It's wide mood swings. So we're going to treat that differently than we are Alzheimer's, which is a slow, insidious onset that progressively declines. So you can see that taking it to that next level really does help.
Definitely. So after someone gets that diagnosis of dementia, what can families do? Because they get that diagnosis, and quite often the person that has been diagnosed completely just goes blank and shuts down and feels numb. And I know when I spoke to Kate Swaffer yesterday, she said that she calls her husband the second brain for her. And while she wants to remain incredibly independent, he's her backup brain. So she said she couldn't have been more thankful for him being there, because he was the one digesting it at that stage. So what can family members do to really get through that initial phase after that diagnosis?
First of all, let me say Kate Swaffer is an amazing woman who is really opening the doors of understanding for a lot of us and is freely sharing what it's like. I think her analogy there with the second brain is an excellent one. And all of her insight is just excellent. To me, I think so often we have a chasm of misunderstanding between the diagnosis and the walking out the door. There's just, as Kate said, this sort of numbing effect for the person, and the family member who's there is the backup brain. Hopefully a family member is there, because if not, the person living with dementia may not even want to talk about it to anyone, and that's not good for anyone. So I think also we have to keep in mind that when the diagnosis is made, everybody wants to do something, right? Let's do something about it right now. Now, depending on the level of the dementia involved, you might want to sit on it a bit. If it's a greater depth of dementia, you don't have time to sit on it. You're going to have to start figuring out ways to live with it for everybody. To me, when one person is diagnosed with dementia, an entire group of people is actually diagnosed with dementia. It's the family, it's the community, it's the medical community. All of that is a part of that diagnosis. So first thing to do, I think, is to examine how we can nutritionally care for the person with dementia from the get-go. How we can start getting them on a nice exercise routine to uncloud as much as we possibly can, to try to look at what things they do well. This is a key point with those of us who love people with dementia. If you look at all the problems right out of the chute, then you're going to find problems. But if you look at the things that they can do well, then you're going to look at strategies to enhance that. In other words, if the person is still really able to communicate via telephone or FaceTime, boy, bump that up big. If they are unable to do that, start putting together memory boxes. Start getting, don't use digital pictures to show them. Print out pictures so that you can put them in a memory box. And what I'm trying to say here is the panic at the beginning needs a moment. It needs a moment. And then you can start to examine what things are being done well. Nighttime wandering is one of the things that really gets families to the doctor the fastest, because it's impacting everyone's schedule. So in a case like that, once the diagnosis is made, you see you've identified a problem, but let's look at the positive. So when your loved one gets up in the middle of the night, you put a bed alarm on the bed so that you know when they're up. And when they get up, I hate to say it, but you're going to have to get up and make them a cup of tea, sit with them for a minute, preferably in a rocking chair, and then escort them back to bed as though it was the first time. Do you hear that? As though it was the first time, so that the person living with dementia understands that this is bedtime and we're going to go to bed now, and then leave the room. So you see, there's so many great strategies out there to offset the blow of dementia, and finding a good support group online, or a group that will allow you to learn more. The more you learn about how the brain dies and what the behavioral output of that is and how to mitigate that, the better off you're going to be. So there are so many in Australia, so many great care groups that you can sign on to learn more and to be involved. Or if you'd rather not be involved at the beginning, just join it and listen. Just listen.
And I was speaking to a neuroscientist the other day, and she was saying that she develops around childhood protection. and what the response to the brain is around not receiving compassion and empathy as a child, and what the longer lasting effects of that is. And if we understood as an aged care sector, not just the awareness of dementia, but what the response is and why that person is acting like that from the brain perspective, she believes that that's kind of the missing link to us not being able to provide adequate care, because we've got this level of understanding and we really need to go 2 levels deeper to the whole aged care workforce. We've got 1 in 3 people in the next 30 years that are going to have dementia.
Yes, I couldn't agree more. In fact, my company developed the Virtual Dementia Tour, which allows you to walk in the shoes of a person living with dementia. And I so firmly believe that until we can do that and really understand where they're coming from, it's going to be, we're shooting from the hip. A lot of family members have gone through, over 3 million people have gone through the tour. And once the pandemic is over, we'll be able to offer it again. But in the meantime, in order to get to that depth of empathy that you're talking about, Rebecca, I think it's a good idea for family members to, when I mention take a pause, take a beat, wait for a minute, let's think this through. I'd like for family members to just sit and visualize what their day is like. Just think about what it's like to not understand what people are saying, what it's like to walk into a room and not recognize anyone who's there, even though they're family members, to feel what it's like to look at a plate of food and not know what to do with the fork, or even what to do with it, or what it is. You know, take a moment to viscerally feel that, and your empathy then will begin to rise just automatically, because then you'll be able to care for your loved one in a greater way, because you've kind of in some sense been there. If you don't do that, like you said, Rebecca, there's that level of misunderstanding of what's going on. I have an example of a woman who thought they were dealing drugs. The nursing home was dealing drugs. And in fact, she was misunderstanding that when they were passing the meds throughout the facility, they weren't dealing drugs, they were passing meds. And her misunderstanding of that caused great alarm. She was calling the police, she was calling emergency workers to come help because the staff was dealing drugs. Well, you can see what happened right there. It makes perfectly good sense if you take a moment to step back and see what she was saying, and see what she was seeing. She was seeing that happen, and she was concerned, she was worried. So what do we do about that? You see, unless you take that moment to do that, you begin to think, oh, she's hallucinating now, we're gonna have to medicate her, we're gonna have to, you know, do all kinds of things that are so completely unnecessary.
It really is. And I think that's just the generalization around people don't know how to support them or understand what's going on. So they do turn to that medicalization of that, when we just need to be more empathic in our response to be able to provide that adequate support in the home and the wider community to enable people.
Exactly.
So around support strategies, do you have 5 key support strategies that you support families with after their loved one is diagnosed?
I do, but let me start with the first one, is if you don't take care of yourself, you're not going to be able to take care of your loved one. And that sounds trite, but it's not. The rate of death for the caregiver versus the loved one is disproportionate. And you need to be there. You need to be that person, that other brain. You need to be that person. So I think it's important to understand that once you're frazzled, and you know when that happens, we all know when that happens, don't disregard it. Take a break. You're going to have to. Now, what in all of that, what I find is most helpful to me, and I'm the caregiver of a 93-year-old father with vascular dementia. In fact, he's asleep behind those doors right behind me, right there. Is that I have to find a place in the house where I can go by myself and just chill.
Yeah.
Just, you got to find that place. Even if you find that place and you sit in a chair and it's not quite alone, but in your mind, you go to a place where you're most relaxed. That's my first recommendation to families. Again, you can't do anything unless you are able to do something. My second recommendation is, again, to look at the good things, the successful things that your loved one can do, and focus on those. The third thing is pay attention to the nutrition. Please try to cut back on caffeine. Try to cut back on, for your loved one, try to cut back on meals that are fried and processed. Try to focus on the healthy food choices for your loved one. And included in that third one, hydration, hydration, hydration. You've got to have water or juice or popsicles or jello or things of that nature readily available. Lack of hydration is seen to be one of the biggest problems for people living with dementia. They don't think to drink a lot. You have to be that second brain, and you have to think for them to make that available, because without it, their confusion increases exponentially. Mm-hmm. So that's number 3. Number 4, find ways that you and your loved one can continue to connect. Whether that's through pictures, whether that's through talking about past experiences. That's one of the biggest successes of your loved one. They can remember things from the past relatively well. In fact, some of them will live in the past. And that's okay. There's nothing wrong with that. I think God did a pretty cool thing when he allows our elders with dementia to think about those things in the past rather than dealing with the current. So let's let them live there if they want to. So encourage your relationship with them through things like that, that the two of you have the history together that you can light on. And the final thing is, remember the spirituality of your loved one. I think so often what happens when people live with dementia is we forget that core value for them, whether it's church services or whether it's reading scripture, whether it's being a part of different religions, the Jewish religion, all the just whatever spiritual outlet your loved one had, please don't forget that that's still there and capitalize on that. I've so many times seen people living with dementia who are just having an agitated, terrible day, and I start singing a hymn and they begin to calm down and eventually start to sing with me. And that's at the very later stages. So lean on that sense of peace, whatever gave them peace when they were, before they had dementia. Please level in on that.
Excellent. I love it. I love it so much. Thank you. Before we finish up, I just want to do a 1-minute fact find with you. So people who are viewing this can kind of find out a little bit more about PK, which everybody wants to know. We know when you're in Australia that everyone fell in love with you, that you come into contact with. So just a quick 1 minute. What was your nickname your parents used to call you?
I'm so sorry, I couldn't catch the end of that, but I really loved the accolades, so if you'll just keep those coming.
What was the nickname your parents used to call you?
They didn't have a nickname. They called me Paula K. When I was in trouble, it was Paula K. It wasn't PK at all.
On a scale of 1 to 10, how good of a driver are you?
Well, I don't want to say it too loud, but I think a darn good driver. So I'd say a 10.
At what age do you want to retire?
Retirement is an interesting word. For me, I'm slowing down a bit. I'm 67. I'm slowing down mainly because of the caregiving role, but also because I tire very easily. So I don't know that I would call it retiring, but slowing down. So from a slowing down standpoint, I'll probably retire on my last breath.
I hope so too, me personally, because I don't want to lose connection with you. Do you
Never.
snore?
You'll never lose that connection with me, my love.
Do you snore?
I do. Oh, horrible, horrible snore. And what's even worse is my husband snores too. And so I noticed this morning getting up that the dogs are snoring too. So I can't even imagine what our bedroom sounds like.
Like a symphony.
Symphony. Yeah.
Oh, what's your favorite junk food?
My favorite junk food, gosh, there's so many. It's hard to pick a favorite. Those little combos, you know, with well, I have Jolly Ranchers, which I brought those to you when I came. Jolly Ranchers, and also combos. They're little pretzels that have cheese inside the pretzel. So unhealthy, but you can't eat just one. It's impossible.
And what's your favorite carb? Beer, bread, pasta, or rice?
My favorite what?
Carbohydrate.
Oh, carbohydrate. Okay, carb. See, in the U.S., cob, I wasn't sure if that was corn on the cob or or what. So, well, I like them all.
Good, indulge in it all.
No problem with any of them.
Well, thank you so much, PK. I really appreciate your time so much, and for getting up so early in the morning. And thank you to your husband as well for getting everything set up.
He's good for that.
I can't wait to share this with the wider audience, and I look forward to bringing your expertise and your knowledge around dementia to them.
Oh, my precious lamb, you're just a light in the darkness, so don't you dare stop doing what you're doing. You're amazing.
Thank you.
Thank you
So much.